University, with its research and development hub. Akdeniz University is located in the heart of the Mediterranean.
Okay. Now that Professor Toros is here, I think we can start. Welcome. I will try to introduce a little bit. Our guest is also a long-time friend of mine. I'm very honored to have him here because, first of all, he's a great speaker. He has never been boring. And the reason why he is a great speaker is because he's a great researcher. When we were still not aware of what to do about research, that we have to learn more about research techniques, Professor Toros was into it. At that time, we didn't really understand what he was trying to achieve. But now, reading his research always makes me more enthusiastic about learning more about the field and doing more research. What's more, in the first speech, the first speaker mentioned how valuable it is to make multidisciplinary research in the field of communication. I think Professor Toros contributes to this a lot. His political science background really brings a fresh and productive perspective to communication studies. I think he really singles out in the field of communication in Turkey with his research. So I'm really grateful to him for accepting to take part in this symposium as a keynote speaker. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Well, Seçil, thank you very much for these very kind and kind of very heavy words. I hope I can, just handle these words and present something interesting and not bore people with these, stuff that I'll be telling you in the moment. So thank you very much for having me here. I'm really honored to deliver this keynote speech to the International Symposium on Media Studies. But today, I'll be talking about, as Seçil said, what I know better than other concepts, which is the research methods. I'm a political scientist by education, and then when I do research, I always try to use some different tools, different methodologies, different approaches, and by this way, I managed to develop a kind of a skill set to understand what's going on in the social world, not limited to the political science, but also for other social sciences which intersects with the area of political science. And of course, one of them is communication. I have developed some interest in political science and especially in the area of communication, which is, of course, a very basic function of human activity, which can intersect with a lot of other areas, scientific areas. So what I worked recently mostly is on political communication. But of course, we have all witnessed some kind of different developments, especially throughout this last 2 decades in the area of communication due to the recent developments, especially in technology. And most people talked about this a lot. I'll not be going into details of those. But what bothered me about these developments is basically about what's going on the data part of this development. So, of course, when you check this developments out, it was a very kind of at the beginning, there was a very optimistic approach to what's going on in the area of communication with the enormous amount of data that we have developed. But of course, we have to understand what's going on there. The problem for that, for communication research about this, I really do not like the word big data because it means everything and anything. At the same time, it means nothing at all. So this increased amount of data, I have to I prefer to use that phrase. This increased amount, we try to understand what we will do with this increased amount of data at the first sight. But of course, let me introduce you, or let me talk about how we developed that, how this data was developed within the area of communication. We all know the story, but still it will be, I think, appropriate to provide some kind of background. We leave kind of pebbles, electronic digital pebbles, whenever we move in our social world, in our daily life. That means when you watch something, when you exist on social media, when you buy something, when you like something, and so on and so forth, these are all happening in the area of data. So it's just, we have our Twitter accounts, we send likes and dislikes and so on and so forth. But this new increased amount of data basically rests on these new developments. What I mean is that these are the things that we leave trace voluntarily or involuntarily in the area of social world or technical world. So this is I don't know, most probably you're aware of the application which Google provides to all of its users. It's the timeline. If you accept everything when you have a Google account, if you kind of pass through these long documents by accepting every other thing on the list, most probably you are hooked by this Google timeline as well. And if you do not know this already, I recommend you to check this out if you have a Google account, of course, or a Gmail account, whatever it is. It just records every single move you make. It is quite spooky. When I first saw it, I was quite impressed about what I let them know about myself and my activities. Anyways, this is another kind of another line of discussion, but still Google just collected the pebbles, the digital pebbles that I left around, and then they compiled it and they provided as a kind of a gift for me, saying that, okay, you did this and that, and you were here, and you shoot this photo, and you shoot this shot, and so on and so forth last month. Well, good. It's good to look at the social side of it, but still, what does that mean about data for social science data? The thing is that this increased amount of data, which is commonly referred as this big data, is the collection of these digital pebbles, basically. And at the first instance, people in the social scientists were kind of welcomed this quite enthusiastically, thinking about that, okay, now we will have, since we have that amount of big and wide and deep data, now actually we will have the potential to organize and understand the human activity which has never been done before. Because now we have the amount of data that we need in order to understand and explain the human behavior, social human behavior. But I call this stage as the first stage of social science meeting with big data, and I call this data-drunk social science. It was data-drunk because of a couple of things, because actually there were lots of data. So that much data make you drunk. So it's a kind of a good expression for me. But still, if you're drunk, you don't know what's going on. So basically, these two effects, I can identify these two consequences of what's going on in the social science when I checked this first level development. So the claim was actually, since we have now large data sets about human behavior, we can understand our political life and social life better. That was the basic assumption. Why? Because these, at the first stage, when we were data drunk, there were three reasons for such kind of an approach. Because first thing first, this big amount of data comes with precision. That was the first assumption or first expectation from this big amount of data, because since this is about attitudes, behaviors, and questions and answers in real form, no one actually forced you to do something or to answer a questionnaire or to attend a kind of an experimental setting. This was all in a normal setting. So it was kind of, we are for the first time in the social science history, according to this first level assessments, we were collecting data in real life without any disturbance at all, which will make the outcomes or the scientific work more precise. The second one is about its volume. Of course, we can, even the name suggests it's big data. So we never had that amount of data in social science before at no single point of time. And also the third idea about this first level is that we'll have now the data in depth. What does that mean? It's actually we all have a lot of detail. As I told you in the previous example, Google timeline even just asks or suggests you how to take a photo, and then it will kind of remembers you, and then provide some further details about you and so on and so forth. This is too much granular data, which makes it quite depthful. This first stage among social scientists and some other scientists, basically, who are not really social scientists, were kind of welcomed quite well, according to, Watts, which is a very famous word in 2011. It was the idea that this was equal to the invention of telescope for the astronauts or for the astronomical sciences, and it was quite welcomed. And another famous phrase for this development was the social. It was produced by Pentland. It was called as the social physics. So at this first initial stage, people all were quite enthusiastic about this and trust that it will make a revolution. It will provide a measurement revolution, because now we have reached to real data, hard data, as any other kind of scientific area did, like natural sciences or physics and so on and so forth. Also, what we have to do, what is remaining, what remains for us to do is that to kind of learn how to code, learn how to, some further empirical training in order to understand that much amount of data and to solve the technical issues behind it, like storage and so on and so forth. So this first stage did last not that long, because when the first attempts happened, its studies only focused on the descriptive use of digital services, like how many people tweeted, how many people liked on Facebook, or how many people liked, or who is friend of whom, and so on and so forth. These were all descriptive findings about this data, this new data, or some fictional proof of concepts efforts. So efforts rarely go further and actually model the human behavior as we all do in inferential statistics. They tried to do that, or of course, everyone tried to do that, but then the picture became quite blurry. There were before going into the details of the problems of using that data for inferential statistics, is actually I have to underline two other things, which is basically the first dimension is a technical one. People just noticed that the data is not available. The data is only available as much as the firm lets you to have. For example, you cannot access Twitter data as much as you can, or Facebook data, or whatever data you are interested in. Why should they do? These are all kind of, corporations, and they make profit out of this data. And of course, quite understandably, they do not share it. So it is not the data for everyone. We do not have the chance of accessing that data as we wanted to do in a snapshot. So the second one, which is quite important, more important than that, is the conceptual problems. Because since we have this big amount of data, granuled and whatever it is, but still we need conceptual and theoretical background to make meaningful outcomes are using this data. So that was one of the basic problems, because people suddenly realized that it is quite hard to set theoretical foundations, and quite hard to use the basic rules, to apply the basic rules of research using with data. I'll give an example in a moment, but then first thing first, let me talk about what I thought was wrong with this approach. So what was wrong with that is the basic thing is that technical compliance or incompatibility of big data with the quantitative methods. It seems that you have a lot of data, which is nice for quantitative analysis, but still it violates, especially the data that you collect from social media tools, which is very common for social media research or any kind of communication research recently, actually do not comply with the basic rules of financial statistics. So people just try to kind of skip that part. They try to make use of that big data, and then they analyze, for example, German elections, and they find out that with the Twitter data, it was the Pirate Party who will win the German elections. But of course, they did not even get a 1% vote in total. So, but that article was published already. So it was, then people started to think about, okay, let's hang on, what we are doing is kind of wrong. It's not matching with the social reality that we are passing through. So another problem with this approach is that in most of the statistical techniques you have a population, and then you have a sample out of it, and then you calculate your confidence intervals and so on and so forth, and you declare how much error you make, and then you make some inferences about the data that you collect, saying that this party will get that much vote within the confidence levels of this much and that much. But here, when you use the social, for example, social media tool data, like Twitter data, we have the initial studies had the error of thinking about, when they kind of collect data from Twitter, they thought about this is their population, but it was not. So this is called N equals to all fallacy. We collect something from Twitter data. It's very easy. It's becoming much and much easier nowadays. Even an undergrad can kind of scrape data from web, or collect tweets, or collect Facebook messages or Instagram posts, and so on and so forth. It's quite easy. But then people, when you do not apply the very basic rules about statistics to that data, they started to make some kind of very serious errors. So that is another problem. And when you collect data from the web, it is not your population. It's only a cross-sectional data that you collect at that single point of time, which can be used still for descriptive purposes, for kind of, hunches, or kind of, having an idea about the nature of the concept, but that's all. You cannot do anything further than that with the data that you have collected from the web without knowing any kind of sampling frame or any kind of population measures. So the basic thing about this, Salganik, after like 3 or 4 years, mentioned that, saying that it is meaningful for description, but is not meaningful for inference. So we all know any kind of basic statistics student knows that there's a problem of skewness within this data. Not everyone uses the Twitter. There's kind of people who are, especially in countries in earlier studies, we have that problem. They try to solve this problem with post weighting and so on and so forth, but still it was not very reliable at all. So then people start to say that, falling into the trap of the logical positivism, I would say, they try to make the sense of numbers by not using any theory at all, which is the most dangerous things that you can do in social science, in my opinion. In order to do any kind of quantitative work, you have to start with a theory. You have to test a theory. All this is it's not very complicated. It's very easy. You have to start with a theory. You have to formulate your hypotheses and you have to test them. But this process actually reversed that. And then people start to try to make the theories out of these numbers by checking out of these correlations or any kind of statistical tools that they use, which is wrong according to the rules of basic statistics. So this was another danger. But now these were the errors that I spot about the communication studies at the early and middle levels. But then as a kind of a student of research methods, I started to think about what can be done with that data then. I mean, it's huge. You have access, and then you know the dangers, you know the limitations. Then what can we do with this data? So how can we fix it, as the title of the presentation says? How can we fix the errors that we have done beforehand? I'll just, I always give the same example about this social media data, but the solution for me is going through or combining the qualitative and quantitative approach together. For example, I always give the example of grounded theory. In our work, we know what grounded theory is. It's a kind of a theory building approach which is inductive. You have to have lots of observations. You have to kind of formalize and understand at every stage of data that you collect. You may collect, for example, in grounded theory, you can use qualitative data as the text or any kind of material that relates to your research question, and then try to make use out of it. Then develop a theory, develop a concept, whatever you're interested into. Then I started to think about, okay, right, for example, hashtags. We talk about hashtags in Twitterverse is kind of, hot topics. The ones who are not very familiar to Twitter may kind of, miss that, but it is a kind of an, base for trying to understand what's going on at that particular time. So when you check this hashtags regularly, you have the chance of developing a kind of concept. I'm not talking about any kind of inference here. I'm not talking any kind of statistical tests. I'm not talking any kind of further analysis. What I do is that for grounded theory, you may use, for example, interviews, but it's already there, and lots of people actually joins that interview. You can think about hashtags like that, and then you can make some kind of meanings out of these texts, but the amount is huge. It's quite enormous. When you check about a hashtag, even if you remove the retweets and the repetition messages and so on and so forth, you still have lots of information, lots of text, which is very difficult to understand or make the use of it. Then here we can still return back to quantitative methods, which you can use. For example, clustering methods, which recently people developed a lot of different approaches rather than the things that we already know, like k-means clustering or hierarchical clustering. Nowadays, people use like LDAs and so on, some different algorithms, which is very easy to learn and apply. And then this solution actually goes back and forth with the big data, with the qualitative methods, and with the quantitative methods. And I'm trying to convince my MA and PhD students to make a project on this, trying to formulate the concepts using only Twitter data, but by not violating the rules of statistics, and at the same time making grounded theory work. So it is a difficult task, but a couple of students tried, and some initial findings are kind of looks quite good, basically. And I think that's the solution. That's only a single solution that I thought of, but we are a big community here, and if you are into any kind of methodological discussion, you may come up with any kind of alternative ideas, which I love to hear. And I think I should stop here. I already talked around half an hour, and if we have any questions or any discussions, then we can talk about this, or any questions, I would be more than happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, you had some more time, but in the end, we also had some more time.
I thought that I only had half an hour, so sorry.
No, nicely this time we have longer time, because the speaker that's going to take the place after you will start at 6 o'clock. So we have half an hour that we can keep on discussing. And I am, at least when I see the attendance online, I can guess there can be some questions coming up. As people try to pose their questions, I have my question first of all. I see some research. It doesn't have to be based on big data, but sometimes also just normal, usual survey methods. But they cannot, they don't have time or support to make a representative sample, work on a representative sample. So they just send their surveys to anyone who can answer. I didn't just see this in Turkey. I also saw similar examples in foreign publications. They base their representativeness, although they mention their limitations. They say that yes, we did the surveys this way, but the people's profile that we reached, half of them are women, half of them are men, and the age distribution or education distribution, whatever, is similar to how it is in the society. And they try to base their validity on that. Could such an argument also be valid for big data use? That's one question. And secondly, yes, perhaps it may represent the distribution of sex, income, age, education in the society, but still there are also research showing who is in the social media, who is tweeting, who is using Facebook, who is using Instagram. And that research also shows us that certain social media is more associated with certain age groups, certain political views, certain sections of the society, certain education levels. Would this still become a problem, although it may represent in general the distribution of gender, blah, blah, blah. This association of certain social media platforms and certain social groups would still become a problem, do you think, would it?
The answer for your first question is no, basically. For me, the answer is quite clear. But of course, there are a lot of discussion going on about this. This is a very frequently asked question that you have asked. Can we how can we find any can we find any method to use that data for generalization? That's the basic question. And then people start to develop some other methods, some other tools, for example, matching. Of course, we know that Turkish, for example, let's say that we have in the Turkish society 50% women, first 50% men, then they assume that if you collect if your sample is 50% women, 50% men, then it would be all okay. I would say still no, because what is important here is this selection procedure rather than who is in, right? That's the basic problem. And sampling is kind of it has very strict rules, scientific rules, how to do this. But still, it is a kind of an art at the same time, because not every single question, social question, can be solved with the strict methods of sampling. But this does not provide us to do whatever we want with the data. Okay, so it is kind of I'm kind of an orthodox about these sampling methods, because and also basically the engineers and the people who work with medicines, for example, pharmacists, are quite very sensitive about the sampling procedures, because if we do an error in social science, people will laugh at us. Okay, that's it at most. But if you do an error with the pharmacy or any kind of medicine that you develop, people will die. So it's not a joke, right? So you have to have that sense in social science what you're doing with the data. So, but of course, since no one dies when some kind of silly analysis about the pirate party wins in Germany, no one comes up and says that, oh, they said that, okay, it's interesting. That's it. That's the worst stuff that you receive from social science community. So people can talk about this, but you can do whatever you want with the data. But I try to summarize in the presentation about why it is that dangerous, right? But of course, we have other tools, and experiments basically is one of them, because the sampling procedure of experiments actually provides us another scientific base to use the social media data, at least, because I want to make a distinction here. When we talk about big data, I always, in this presentation at least, try to give examples from the social media tools. But of course, when you say big data, you have lots of different forms of data, and for some of those, my criticisms will not be valid. But for social media data, my criticisms or my ideas are kind of, I think valid for such kind of data. So experiments. In an experimental setting, since you do not want to generalize to the greater public, okay? Because what is an experiment is not a cross-sectional study. An experiment is quite strong with the reliability and validity if you provide the basis for it, right? And then since we do not need random sampling for experiments, we can use the respondents in the social media in order to make experiments. But that opens up another discussion, because experiments are very difficult to set, very easy to analyze, but very, very difficult to set. So on its own world, experiments have their own strict rules. And if you follow that kind of rule, the social media data can be utilized for experiments. Or it's not the data that we collect, it's the experiment that we develop for social media, right? So since we do not need random sampling, as I said, for any kind of social cross-sectional study, the respondents for an experimental status can be chosen among the Twitter users or Facebook users or Instagram users, whatever it is. But you cannot use this as a questionnaire, and you cannot use this as a random sample for your inferential statistics. Example, the experiments are something else. So if you follow the rules for an experiment, and nowadays it's becoming more and more popular in social science, because I don't know if we have any psychologists in the community, but psychologists usually do their experiments with the university students at all. That's it. Okay, they do not have. What they want to do is that show there is a kind of an effect relationship between the concepts that they analyze. That's it. They do not want to generalize it. They do not want to. They only want to show that in an experimental setting we observe an effect of this on that. That's all they say. Then they replicate their study, replicate, and replicate. Then actually it becomes, if they see the same effect more in time, it becomes more stronger and stronger. The social media data may provide, or actually it's not may, provides a really good background for such kind of studies. So if you want to use social media data, think about experiments or think about any kind of innovative solutions that never done before, like I gave the example of grounded theory.
So basically, now that there is lots of data available, it doesn't make things any easier.
No, of course not. Of course not. That's the illusion. That's the data drunkenness. That's the drunk data science.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
There is no question on the chat feature, dear professor.
Okay, I just tried to open it up and I saw the same thing. That means two things. Either the presentation was quite boring at all, or everyone understood and agreed what I've said.
The latter one. The latter one. Thank you very much.
I think there's a hand risen there.
It's your hand.
It's my hand. Wow.
It's your hand.
Okay, I have a question for myself. Right.
Great. Yeah, I have lots of questions to ask, but it would be to dominate the session. So I'm going to leave it to our private discussions about that kind of things.
Okay.
And I really hope that we will be able to organize this symposium next year face-to-face in Antalya.
Perfect.
And we really expect to host you here so that we can have really longer conversations, and the younger people can also meet you and join those discussions about how to use big data and question this big data drunkenness.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for being
Thank
with
you very
us.
much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.
Thank you very much, dear professor. And then we are going to connect to the other keynote speaker, or we can stop it here and then we can reconnect again. We are now waiting for Mr. Kozines to connect to Teams. When we are ready, I'm going to connect Kozines here. So please let's wait for him to connect here.